Hi folks, in this video I'm going to go over some of the demographic information about rural Alaska and talk about what actually is considered rural Alaska. And this discussion is based in part on the assigned reading, which is the Goldsmith 2008 Survey of Rural Alaska article, but I'm also going to provide a little bit more recent data from 2019 and 2021. So first, how big is rural Alaska? So remote rural Alaska accounts for about 2/3 of the land of Alaska. And remember, put this in context, Alaska is very large. Alaska is about half the size of the lower 48 continental US, all put together in terms of land mass. Remote rural Alaska has about 150 communities, about 60,000 residents, and it's roughly 80% Alaska Native. Compare that to the rest of Alaska. The other 1/3 of Alaska land has about 200 communities, but accounts for about 600,000 residents, right? So 10 times the number of people in half the land mass. And the rest of Alaska is only about 12% Alaska Native. So also just different demographics racially. So you'll hear me talk about boroughs and census areas, and you'll read about it in the readings. So there are 19 boroughs in Alaska, and these are state government units. If you're from the lower 48, they're the equivalent of a county. Of those 19 boroughs, 4 are unified municipalities. So Anchorage, Juneau, Wrangell, and Sitka. The city and the borough are unified. There are 15 ununified boroughs. So if you're in Fairbanks, the North Star borough is an ununified borough because it is separate from the city of Fairbanks. In addition to those 19 boroughs, there are 10 census areas. Those census areas account for 56% of Alaska land. Why and how are they different than boroughs? A borough is actually a unit of state government that provides some sort of services, has elected or appointed officials. Census areas don't provide public services. They don't have governments at the census area level. It's just a designation that's used when the U.S. Federal government collects census data every 10 years. These are areas that are used for statistical purposes only. So you'll see them oftentimes kind of referred to interchangeably. Census areas are compared to boroughs, but you can bet that census areas tend to be more remote, smaller in population. They just don't have a seat of government. One example here would be the Yukon-Koyukuk census area, which you can see encompasses quite a lot of land in interior Alaska, but doesn't have a unified form of state government. This is kind of a cool map that shows what Alaska would look like if each one of those sets of squares represented 1% of Alaska's population. And you can see here Anchorage and the Matanuska-Susitna or Mat-Su areas. Between the two of those, that's the vast majority of Alaska's population. Let's go back to this map for a second. And here is the Mat-Su borough. And this little number here, this number 7, that is Anchorage. So this amount of land is the vast majority of population. The part of Alaska that we're going to spend most of our time on this semester is rural Alaska. And within rural Alaska, so we're forgetting about Anchorage, Fairbanks, Juneau for a second here, and just looking at rural Alaska, about 1/3 of their population is concentrated in rural hubs. So places like Bethel, Utqiagvik, which the 2008 reading would refer to as Barrow, but it has subsequently had a name change, Nome, Dillingham. So you can see I put the populations here. Bethel has a little over 6,000 people. So it's still a far cry, even though it's a large hub village, and this photo here is Bethel. It's still a far cry from Anchorage. And Anchorage itself, if you put it in the context of the lower 48, is probably a fairly small municipality in the grand scheme of things, with about 300,000 people in the area. The rest of rural Alaska, so almost 70% of rural Alaska, is organized mostly in small communities, which I'll talk about villages most frequently in this class. And those villages have an average population of about 276. So these rural hub villages like Bethel that have 6,000 people, though, serve a really important purpose for the smaller outlying villages. Here is a map of the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, YK Delta, and you'll see circled in red there's Bethel, and you can see how close a bunch of outlying villages are. Bethel has a hospital in it, and so a lot of these outlying villages, if a resident of the village needs health care, they go to Bethel first. So hub villages like Bethel can play a very important role overall in the rural economy. This isn't indicative of what every area of Alaska looks like. There are some places where rural villages are not in close proximity to a larger village. And as each of you do research on your assigned region, you will learn a little bit more about the unique demographics and quirks of your region. So again, to bring home the point, most of rural Alaska is Alaska Native. So you can see here, especially western Alaska is somewhere between 75 and 100% Alaska Native. And then you can see that the demographics change dramatically when you start getting into south central Alaska and some of the bigger urban areas such as Fairbanks North Star and Juneau. So population shifts and migration. The Goldsmith article cites a 1% increase in rural Alaska population from 2000 to 2006 and states that there's significant migration from rural to urban Alaska, especially to Anchorage. This is driven by access to economic opportunity, access to healthcare, access to education, job training, and it's not, rural Alaska is perhaps a more extreme example because of how remote some communities are in rural Alaska, but this is a demographic trend that's pretty similar to a lot of other parts of rural America. Data update. Since 2008, what has happened in rural Alaska? Birth rates are higher in rural Alaska than they are in urban Alaska. So this chart shows you the rate of natural increase, which is just a fancy way of saying births and deaths. So not looking at migration, moving in and out of the region, just how many people are being born there versus how many people are passing away. And you can see that, again, western Alaska, western rural Alaska, has a higher rate of natural increase, so more births relative to deaths, than most of the rest of Alaska. But these areas also have the highest rate of net out-migration. So the same areas that have the highest rate of natural increase also have the most people leaving the region. And again, the destination is mostly urban Alaska. An update from the 2008 data, instead of Anchorage being the #1 draw, you can see that there is actually a lot of migration into the Mat-Su Valley area. One other point of note is that most of the out-migration from rural Alaska is working age individuals. And that's a trend that still holds true today. you can see here by looking at this chart that shows you what proportion of the population in these areas is age 65 or older, that western rural Alaska still is fairly young. Again, that natural rate of increase, having lots of kids, helps bring the average age of the population down. That being said, most of the outmigration from these areas is working age individuals, roughly those between the ages of 20 and 64. That creates some challenges for the rural economy because there's fewer individuals that can participate in either the cash economy, so people with cash-paying jobs, or the subsistence economy, so able-bodied individuals who are going out fishing, hunting, gathering, and performing a lot of traditional subsistence activities. We will follow up on the theme of subsistence again in the next video. Okay, thank you.